Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where we're on a mission to change the landscape of brain hemorrhages by driving awareness, delivering education, and pushing for real action. Now, brain hemorrhages affect millions of lives every single year. But at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to preventing them before they happen and funding pioneering research to advance treatment for when they do. In this podcast, we'll dive deeper into the world of brain hemorrhages because the more we understand, the more we can create real change, and together we can truly prevent the preventable. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. As always, I'm your host, Fiona, and thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. Now, somehow we are already into December, and it seems incredibly crazy that in a few weeks we'll be closing the door to 2025 and saying hello to 2026. And as we've spoken about before, it's been a monumental year for NKMT with an immense amount of growth and impact, but none of that would have been possible without you, our incredible supporters. So truly, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. I have no doubt that 2026 is going to be equally as expansive. And if you want to be part of our mission next year, head over to our website and look at how you can play a part in better preventing and treating brain hemorrhages. Whether that's by volunteering, attending one of our events, taking part in a race, or organising a lunch and learn for your team at work. There are so many ways that you can help us with our mission. But as well as being the first week of December, this week is National Grief Awareness Week, a moment to pause and acknowledge the profound impact that grief has on individuals, families, and communities. At the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we know how sudden loss, particularly from something as devastating as a brain hemorrhage, can completely upend a person's world. Grief is complicated, it is messy, and yet grief is something we so rarely talk about openly, which makes it even harder to navigate. What's worse, grief is not one size fits all. It shapeshifts. It comes, it goes, it is ever-changing, and because of this, it is impossible to write a blueprint of how best to navigate it. But I hope that today's episode brings you a deeper level of understanding about grief to help you navigate your own journey. To help guide us, we'll be joined by the wonderful Helen Arthur. Helen is an emotional wellness coach, helps people navigate the pain of grief and loss in a safe, structured way, which helps to uncover and release the unresolved emotions that can hold us back, allowing people to heal and move forward with greater peace. Today, with Helen, we aim to give you some really practical tips to help you navigate your own journey of grief. And we'll be walking you through 5 key steps that many people experience as they learn to live with loss. Understanding grief, what grief really is, what the different types are, and how it affects us so differently, emotional, physically, mentally. We'll then look at acknowledging and accepting the grief, giving ourselves permission to grieve without judgment or timeline. We'll explore navigating the everyday reality of loss, managing the nonlinear, messy, day-to-day experience of grief. We'll look at living with grief, learning how to carry it with us as we move forward in life. And finally, we'll look at turning grief into action, finding meaning and purpose by honouring the person we've lost. From a personal perspective, I completely understand the messiness of grief. Having lost my sister, Natalie, when I was just 20, my boyfriend, Andrew, when I was 29, and recently my father when I was 32. My adult life, unfortunately, has largely been dictated by the wild ride of grief. Whilst every experience has been difficult, every response has been different. Each of those experiences changed me that little bit more, and each experience reframed my perspective of life, myself, and the world around me. And I have no doubt that those of you listening who have lost someone close to you will completely relate to that. Grief, as I said, is complicated. It is incredibly difficult, and it certainly isn't a linear process. So I truly hope that today's episode will give you some helpful guidance to help you navigate your own journey of grief. Whether you're currently grieving, supporting someone who is, or simply trying to understand the process more deeply, we hope this episode offers comfort, clarity, and connection. So without further ado, let's jump in. Helen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us. So today we're talking all about grief, and I think it is a really complicated topic. It is very layered. It's very emotive for a lot of people. It's very difficult to talk about. I think because it's so difficult to talk about, we don't talk about it. So therefore, we don't understand it, we don't manage it, and it can be messy. And so hopefully today we can unpick a lot of that messiness, and we can give some really practical tips for people to take away, or at least to better understand the process of grief. Maybe they've been through it, going through it, or never been through it. And before we go into all of that, I'd love to just kind of hear a little bit more about you and understand a little bit more about your work and what got you into this subject of grief in the first place.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, Fiona. It's lovely to be here. You're absolutely right. It is messy and it's hard and it's difficult and it's stuff people don't want to talk about at all because it's uncomfortable. I've been a personal development coach for many years, and working with people, I often found that they were stuck in their lives for some reason. And when we would unpick that, it turned into something that had happened in their past, which had potentially created a limiting belief for them, or which had just something that they hadn't processed and hadn't worked through, often related to some form of loss in their lives, whether that was loss of trust or something like the loss of a parent or a partner. And so I really wanted to be able to help them more. And so I came to the Edutherapy program as a tool, really, to add to my toolkit so that I could be a better coach for people. So that's really how I came to it. But when I started to do that work, part of it means we have to be healed enough ourselves to be able to help other people through their own grief. So yeah, I uncovered a lot of things I hadn't really thought about for a long time.
Yeah, I'm sure when you're helping others, as you say, you've got to kind of be fully aware of yourself and feel confident in yourself as well. And to your point, grief can mean many different things. It essentially just means loss. It doesn't necessarily mean death. No. It can mean, loss of a life that you thought you were going to have. It can mean, as you say, loss of trust, loss of a relationship. It can come in many different guises. And I think that's where it can be complicated, because I think sometimes then it's like, well, what is grief? So what is grief?
Okay. Sometimes it's easier to know what something isn't, so that you can then know what it is. So what it isn't is, first of all, it isn't intellectual. So it's not in our heads. It really doesn't live there. It's not an illness. And it's not reserved for death. Like you said, it's not only bereavement. So what is it then? It is something that is purely emotional. It's natural. It's a perfectly normal response to something. And here's what's really interesting is that it's perfectly unique to each individual. And you listed a number of different kinds of losses there. And actually, as a bit of an umbrella, you can say that loss is any change to our normal pattern of behavior. And that just tells you how broad it can be when we consider what loss is, and therefore what grief then can be like.
Yeah, because then you could say, well, if you have an injury, or you have, you're a keen athlete and you have such bad injury that you lose the ability to do the sport that you love or something, that is in itself grieving, I suppose.
It is, because what you have there is the loss of hopes, dreams and expectations. Yeah. So all the things that you expected for yourself are now either diminished or obliterated because of that injury. And so your whole life changes just because that injury has taken place. And you might have thought into the future about who you were going to be and where you were going to be and what you were going to do. And suddenly all of that is taken from you because you've had an injury. So that's a prime example of loss. And some people would just go, well, it's just an injury, but it's fundamentally changed that person's life. Yeah. And even in the short term, it will change training programs. So even if it's something that's recoverable, there is a change to your pattern of behavior. So you can't train like you used to. You can't do those kinds of things. So immediately there's loss there as well.
Yeah. We recorded an episode with a gentleman called Dom Cassidy, and he had a brain hemorrhage last year, and we spoke about his recovery. We spoke about rebuilding his life after his brain hemorrhage. And one thing that really came through was actually he was grieving the person that he was. He was grieving that, busy businessman, husband, father, the running, the athlete that he was. There were so many elements of his life that he is trying to bit by bit put back together, but it's not what it was. No. And he's missing social aspects because he hates loud noises and he can't deal with that. And he very much is grieving. And, to a normal person, they might say, well, he's fine. He's here. How can we be grieving him because he's here?
Yeah. And I think what we hear is at least. At least he's alive. At least he didn't die. Yeah. At least he can still do X or Y. But actually, for him, he's lost a lot of who he was.
Yeah.
And he will find new ways to be himself, I'm sure, or to be a new version of himself, but it doesn't take away the fact that he's had loss.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that type of grief, which I don't know if we can put a name on that. Could we?
Gosh.
I mean, but there's different types of grief, right? So there's a type of grief where, you know, you're grieving that person, that version of your life. You're grieving what, as you say, you once were able to do.
Yeah.
But it's a very different type of grief, I imagine, to somebody's had a brain hemorrhage, and unfortunately, you know, they had it on Monday, and then by Friday, you know, they'd passed away.
Yeah.
It's very sudden, you know, life's change overnight. That would also be different to if somebody was diagnosed with something unfortunate like cancer, then they are ill for a few years.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of grieving them, but they're still there. You know, they're very different types of grief. Can we explore those different types?
So sometimes people like to give names to those kinds of things. I might refer to it as complex grief, let's say, when it's something that's doesn't seem straightforward enough. But actually, do you know, Fiona, grief is just grief. What has happened and the experience that we then live through, that can be messy and complicated. The couple of examples that you've given are really interesting, because when we have a sudden death or a short time span, we don't have time to maybe even see the person, or to have a chance to speak to them, because potentially they're still alive, but they're uncommunicative, for example, and we can't tell them how we feel, or, you know, they can't respond to us. And then we have the other scenario that you gave, where somebody maybe has a cancer diagnosis, and perhaps they have their treatment, and maybe they're going to remission for a while, and, you know, and there's a longer run to it, and in that time, you would imagine that people would go, oh gosh, this is potentially finite. Maybe I should say a few things that I think I want to say.
There's closure. There's an opportunity to have that closure.
But we don't. We kind of avoid it because, like we said to start, it's a really uncomfortable place to go. So if you were chatting with somebody, you know, a loved one who maybe had a diagnosis, you wouldn't want to necessarily talk to them about
when they're not here.
dying. Yes. And when they're not here, or dealing with their wishes. That can, you know, those are difficult conversations to have. They're really important. But also there's a lot of things that we feel we should have done or could have done. So within grief, there's a lot of mixed emotions, and the conflicting emotions are what creates a lot of emotional pain for people. Because, you know, let's go to your further down the line of those two scenarios you gave. Let's say that you've got an elderly person in your life, and they've passed away. They've had an amazing life. You might feel sad, but incredibly proud of having had them. So I felt that way about my grandmother. She was 96 when she died. I was so proud of having her in my life, and so proud that she knew me as an adult with my own children. That I was sad, but I was just proud and privileged and honored that I'd been there at the end of her life when she'd been there for me at the start of mine. That feels very different to a tragic death of a young person. So yeah, they're layered, and there's so many differences.
Yeah.
The thing is that if you don't know, and this is what life doesn't teach us, life teaches us to look forward to all the good positive stuff. So we look forward to weddings, and to christenings, and to birthdays, and to celebrations. So we look forward to those things, and we plan for them meticulously, right? You think of a bride and how crazy that planning is for years. But we don't plan for accidents. We don't plan for death, which sadly is the only thing we know is going to happen to every single one of us. But we don't because there's real discomfort in that. And so we're not ready when that happens to somebody that's really close to us, or even a celebrity, because it's very interesting, the outpouring of grief that comes when somebody in the public eye you know, is unfortunately, you know, dies, and suddenly people are grieving, and they never even met them, you know, but they feel that they know them, and they have a part of their lives that's, you know, taken up. So it's fascinating, all the different
I think you're so right. And I think one thing, and I think hopefully, you know, are like conversations like this, other conversations that we've had even on this series of the podcast, where we talked about wills and probate as well, just from a really practical point of view, less alone an emotional point. Well, I mean, you could argue that they're both, but I think it's so important to not avoid that conversation, because to your point, we will all die, unfortunately. How that happens might compound the circumstances after, the grief, etc.
Yeah.
But I think, and it would be interesting to hear your view on this, I wonder whether if we spoke about it more, if we spoke about grief, or if we spoke about the process of, the circle of life, do you think that would help us with our grieving journey after?
100%. I think that the more we can talk about grief and about loss, and helping people to identify what loss is in their lives, and then also allow them to be emotionally honest about how they feel about that loss, that enables people to feel much more comfortable with being able to talk about what it is. But because we don't let that happen, people, it just gets pushed down, and so people don't get to talk about it, because very sadly, you talked about when things happen initially, so, and wills and probate and organizing funerals if someone's deceased, or even doing contracts on homes if you move house, because even moving house can be a loss, or losing a house you wanted to purchase that gets purchased by someone else. And there's so many things, but in that time where you might be doing those contracts, or you might be doing wills and probate, you are operating intellectually. You're using all of that logic, and you're keeping your brain busy. And your brain really wants to be kept busy, because what we try to do when we are experiencing grief is that we try to make sense of it. So we try to understand what's happened, or how something's happened. So we like to sequence things, and we like to know the events and what led up to something taking place. So potentially, so we can avoid it happening again, or so that we can, take mitigating steps, or just so simply we can try and understand. But what gets left is the emotional part of grief, which is where we try to answer the question why. And that is often a question that we can't answer, like, why did that happen?
Sorry to interrupt, but this one is actually quite important. We often get asked, what's one thing that you can do to help reduce your risk of a brain hemorrhage? Well, the answer is actually pretty straightforward. Check your blood pressure. And here's why. High blood pressure is one of the leading causes of brain hemorrhage. High blood pressure can affect anyone, and 1/3 of the population has high blood pressure, and 50% of those people don't even know. But the good news is that high blood pressure can be managed, but we need to know our numbers first. So don't leave it to chance. We've made it super simple for you to remember. Sign up to our free monthly reminder service, and we'll nudge you to check your blood pressure every month. Quick, easy, and no excuses. Tap the link in our show notes to sign up for your free reminders now, because if you can prevent it, why wouldn't you?
And that's like one of the hardest questions to answer.
I've heard that so many times of people, whether they've been ill, whether something's happened, and different people, why did this happen to me? And unfortunately, I look around, I think about things that have happened in my life, but I look around at my friends, and I look around at different, and everyone, we all go through challenges, and that is the blunt truth of life, isn't it? And that is really unfortunate, but hopefully if we can speak about it, hopefully we can navigate it that little bit better. So talking about navigating it, in those first few days, so if we're particularly thinking about brain hemorrhages, let's say for now, something's happened, right? So it could be a brain hemorrhage, it could be something else, but something has happened. And I know from experience, those first few days, and it could depend on who, to your point, what, the circumstances around it. But those first few days can be exhausting. They can be a bit of a blur. Depending on, the circumstances. You could be organising a funeral. You could be not. You could just be struggling to kind of get yourself out of bed. It's really, really difficult, those first few days particularly, and those first few weeks. How do you navigate that? What are some tips for people who might be kind of going through a grieving process and they're right at the beginning of it?
It is interesting, because right at the very beginning there does tend to be things that keep us occupied. So there, if someone has died, then we do have wills and funerals and things, but if there's somebody who has been injured, and then we've got other things to think about planning for. Are we planning for rehabilitation? Are we planning or a long hospital stay? So there's all of these little intellectual things, not little. There are all of these intellectual things that keep us really busy. But to come to your point, I think it's really, really important that we allow ourselves to acknowledge how we feel, and not. Everybody says, "Oh, I just need to keep busy," and you'll hear people say, "It'll be better when," or "You'll feel better when the," funeral is over. You'll feel better when you've sorted out their house. You'll feel better when you've sorted out their belongings. You'll feel better when. And so we kind of keep giving us these milestones to reach. And I think the issue is when I've reached all of those milestones, I'm still sitting with the grief that I haven't done anything with. So for me, one of the most important things is for us to be able to label how we feel with some very defined emotional words. So rather than just saying, well, I feel sad or I feel angry, that we can actually dig into that a little bit deeper and go, well, do I feel anger? Do I feel angry, or actually am I feeling fear? If somebody's had brain hemorrhage and not died, but they're going to be changed as a result of that brain injury. So actually, is it anger, or am I fearful of what that, what the life will be like for them or for me, or, so really trying to unpick what the emotion is that we're actually feeling can help us identify with it better. And when we can identify with how we're feeling, we are better able to deal with it, rather than just going, oh my God, I'm just angry. I'm angry all the time. Well, actually, you might be angry one day, or you might be disappointed, or you might be frustrated, or you could be envious of somebody who's got husband, daughter, child who's well.
Do you think we're good at naming our emotions?
No. No. I think we stick them under some pretty big umbrellas. Yeah.
And I think that could, going back to the point we were talking about before, if we talk about things in advance, we're kind of going to help ourselves in the long term when things do happen. And I just wonder whether, if we are able to have more conversations, it doesn't even need to be about death.
No.
It doesn't even need to be with another person, but actually just be able to sit there, whether that's with a journal or with ourselves, and say, how do I feel?
Yeah.
And it's such a simple question, but actually quite often you'll be like, yeah, I feel fine.
Yeah. Every English teacher is going to be loving us, by the way, because use some adjectives. Really describe how you're feeling, because I feel fine. So fine is a little acronym, really, which says feelings internalized, never expressed.
Wow, I like that.
When you feel fine, that's just what you're saying. It's all in there.
Yeah.
Just not going to say it out loud.
Yeah. But I think if we are more in tune with ourselves, we are better able to sit with those emotions and understand what those emotions are. So therefore we know how to deal with them.
And some days when you were talking about the first kind of initial few days where you're busy and stuff is going on, and how do we care for ourselves? I think finding time to be in quiet space, whether that is with a journal, which I think is amazingly helpful, or whether that's with somebody who can just give space for your emotions to be, rather than trying to fix, resolve, sort out, or intellectualize what you're feeling, but just going, oh wow, you feel fear. That sounds hard.
Yeah, exactly. I think we can all do that. I can definitely do that. I try and logic my way out of things.
Yes.
Rather than just feel, so to speak. But I think it is so important to feel and to sit with that grief, and that is really, really, really hard. And it can feel uncomfortable, and you can have moments of strength where you go, okay, no, I'm going to get on with things, and then you kind of get pulled between life and what you should be doing and how you're feeling and your emotions and your mental state and your physical, and it's complicated. It's really hard that. And actually just giving yourself permission to stop and feel, I think is really important. My dad died a couple of years ago, and I'd been through a bit of grief before that. And those first few weeks, I actually felt like I'd learned so much from past experiences, and I just sat on the couch and I watched films, and I kind of just wallowed a little bit.
Yeah.
But I then got out of that. And once I got out of it, it was like, wow, I didn't feel like I had hung on to it. I felt a lot freer. Whereas previously, it'd gone on for longer, the grieving process, because I was ignoring and ignoring and ignoring. And I think it is important. And obviously, for a lot of people, it's not practical. Maybe you've got kids. Maybe you've got
to get on
a ridiculously demanding job or whatever. And actually, you're not able to just sit with the grief and to wallow, so to speak. But I mean, firstly, for those sort of people, how would you advise them to go through those feelings when life doesn't allow you to, I suppose?
I think I would say, first of all, find somebody you can talk to. Really important. So if you have somebody that you can share how you're feeling with, who will just have a couple with you. So not days of binge watching TV or wallowing, because life doesn't allow us to do that. You're quite right. You could have kids. You could, have a job that you need to get back to. So definitely finding someone that can be a shoulder for you, or I like to call it like a heart with ears, someone who's just going to listen, not judge, not go, my God, are you not over it yet? You know, but somebody who's just going to be there. Because the other thing that happens is that you'll find a day where you think, oh yeah, I'm okay today, and then suddenly you'll hear a song on the radio, or you'll go past somewhere, or you'll notice a fragrance or a smell, and suddenly it'll just wash over you all over again, and you think, oh my God, I thought I'd made progress, and I'm a mess on the floor. And I think we have to be kind to ourselves, and treat ourselves with a bit of grace. And it doesn't mean that we can necessarily spend a lot of time doing that, kind of having that self-care, if you like. But even if it is 15 minutes with a cup of tea at the end of the day, where you write down, today was a good day because, today was a hard day because, tomorrow I want to be, the following. And actually just give yourself a little bit of intention, and also not try and do too much, because I think that's the other thing. Sometimes after we've lost someone, actually we've got quite short time frames to make a lot of decisions in, and to do a lot of things, like moving somebody's things out of a nursing home. You're lucky if you get a week, or whatever. So we can be pressurized to do things, but I think we can also put that pressure on ourselves. So actually, if we do that, today was good because, or today was hard because, and tomorrow I need to feel this way, and I need to do this, and just give ourselves one thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes that one thing might be, tomorrow I'm going to get up and shower and wash my hair, and that's my one thing. And then that's okay,
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how much of a sense of achievement that can give you when you are struggling to do anything, and you're like, I'm actually going to wash my hair now. Or I'm going to put on proper clothes and make myself feel, or I'm going to go and do these jobs. And sometimes it is the smaller things, isn't it?
Also, if you don't do it,
so it's okay.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah. What if we do ignore it though? We've gone through that short term, even the medium term, and we live in what can be at times a very stoical culture in the UK.
Yeah.
And I think there's good things for that. It can help you through difficult situations, and there is a time for stoicism. I do think though that when we need to feel, it can, not to say damage, that's not the right word, but it can have an effect on us in the long term.
It can.
What would that look like?
Well, the thing is that it doesn't go away. So we're very good at putting things in our little box and putting the lid back on. And sometimes, like an overfull suitcase, and you've got to really stand on it. And there are certain people who are very good at putting things in boxes and not dealing with them. I don't wish to generalize, but men typically grieve less than women. So they will be much more stoic than women will be. We are more emotional, typically. What happens if you don't deal with it? Ultimately, it will probably bubble up and resurface at some point, because the thing with loss is that it's cumulative, and it's cumulatively negative. So we have one loss and we kind of go, oh well, and we roll with the punches, and we get up and we keep going, and then something else happens, and okay, that was hard, and then we get up and we keep going, and then another one, and then something else, and then something else. And if we just keep putting the lid on, or like a pressure cooker, if we just keep putting something in there, at some point it's going to need to vent. So it does come back. And that's what I found in my coaching business, was that there were people who were stuck by something. And only when you go, hey, well, what happened 8 years ago? And we're like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And suddenly you realize it's something that just hasn't been dealt with. So
yeah. I think sometimes as well, we think we deal with stuff, as I say, I think part of that stoical culture is that, oh yeah, I was sad. I had a cry that one day, and it's very much being honest with yourself sometimes and asking yourself, do you really think I've dealt with this?
Yeah.
Sometimes I think we plaster over stuff so much that we think it's fine, when really, when we really dig into it, it's not. And that can be really confronting. And why would you want to sit down with a therapist, let's say, and uncover all of that when really on a day-to-day you're 70% fine?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think if we can uncover that, because then it can affect us later down the line. It can cause many different,
The thing is, I think if you don't deal with it, what grief does is it affects our productivity. Okay? So it can affect our ability to work well, because grief affects part of our brains that affect our concentration and our ability to put ourselves to a task. So if we haven't dealt effectively with something, we can be distracted by it.
Huge thank you to Colony Co-working for continuing to support the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we have a huge ambitions to completely change the landscape of brain hemorrhages. And whilst we're a small but mighty team, we're all working remotely. And in truth, that's part of our strength. Remote working means that we can connect with incredible talent from across the UK and around the world, helping us push forward faster and smarter. But without a central office, we need flexible, inspiring spaces where we can come together to work productively, collaborate meaningfully, and work on this huge goal we have set ourselves. That's where Colony comes in. Colony is a growing network of beautifully designed co-working spaces here in Manchester, home to creatives, founders, freelancers, and teams of all sizes. They are spaces built for focus, connection, and progress. Not just a place to work, but an environment that actively supports your growth. And they've helped NKMT do just that. To find out more about how Colony could support your business, check the link in the show notes.
So we can affect our work environment. We can affect our health. So we can affect our physical health, so how we actually feel on a day-to-day. And if we've put something aside and not dealt with it for long enough, the tiny little incremental changes to our health we might not even put down to that thing. It can affect our mental health, obviously. So chronic low mood could result in a diagnosis of depression. So we can long-term affect our mental health. And so we really shouldn't ignore it and also we can affect our living relationships. So the relationships that we have with other people, by not dealing with what's there, we can affect those too, because they could be wonderful or different if we dealt with what was sitting in the past. Because the past is not just one single thing and not one single relationship. There's so many threads that are attached.
Yeah, and we can't just, put something in a bucket and put the lid on, so to speak.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about how we move through that and how we navigate it, obviously you work with a lot of people who've experienced losses in many different guises. How does something like therapy or support groups or coaching, how could that help somebody if they're thinking, okay, wait a minute, I feel like I need to address my grief here? How could that support them?
Support groups can be amazing because they give you a community of people who have experienced something similar to you. So support groups can be really, really helpful. Therapy can also be incredibly helpful. Traditional kind of therapy can be really helpful. Counseling. Where I think a step change is needed sometimes for people is to actually do something with what they're feeling. So in a counseling situation, you may go in for your session, talk about everything, and then pack everything back into that box and put the lid on and go away till your next session and then come and unpack it all again. And with a support group, same thing. You'll go to your support group. Oh, I go on a Monday and I have a coffee and there's a group of women or men or people who've experienced the same thing as me. And we go and we tell our story and we have a coffee and maybe we have a cry and we feel a bit better. And then next week we go and we do it all again. So I think taking more action-oriented steps to actually really start to tease out what that emotional truth is, what they are really feeling, enables people to let go of some of the conflicting emotions that they feel. So specifically letting go of anger and resentment. So we can be resentful of a person who's died, and that can be really uncomfortable to sit with. Like, why would you admit to someone else that you feel really angry or resentful that person's died? So letting go of anger and resentment is really important. Letting go of wishes, hopes, and wishes. So because you need to let go, because if you're continually holding on to those, there's cognitive load with you holding what you wish to have happened, and then also telling the emotional truth about that person. So you might have felt that you were so proud to have known them, or you loved the way they did their hair, or some compliment you never paid them. And we don't have the opportunity necessarily to tell people those things. So being able to express those things in an action-oriented way is really beneficial, because that lifts those emotions that we hold on to, because we let go of them. So there's a lot of acceptance involved. And when we go to support groups or we go to more traditional therapy, we are just telling our story over and over and telling and saying how we feel, but not necessarily doing anything with the feelings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I think there's so much to be said for actually verbalizing things. I think that there is something about physically getting it out of your body.
Yes.
and that being the first step. I do also think with anything, you got to do something about it, right? You got to be proactive and take action on how am I best supporting myself through this whole process. It's not like, oh, I just go to that session and that will solve everything.
Yeah,
I need to be the one that takes charge.
Humans do want a quick fix, though.
Oh, absolutely.
So we would love a pill to take to feel better, but there is work in helping yourself to feel better.
Yeah.
Interesting what you said about the value of verbalizing something. Oh, it cannot be understated, because one of the most important things that grievers need is to be heard.
Yeah.
So verbalizing and actually speaking your truth is hugely valuable if you're heard by another person.
Yeah.
So that, that's why having people around you is really important.
Which I suppose kind of then leads on to the point that your friends and your family can also play such a vital role. If you are, one of your loved ones is going through grief right now, actually just sitting down with them and talking to them, or letting them talk, not having to necessarily give them advice, but letting them talk about how they feel, to your point earlier, help them name those emotions, talk through the experience, actually could be incredibly valuable to that person and really support them in their grieving journey. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be a support group or a therapy or anything. It could literally be your best pal, just being able to I'm here. If you just want to talk at me, I'm here for that.
Absolutely. It's about being heard.
Yeah.
So, when they are, I think the issue is when our friends, our family, and those nearest and dearest to us want to help. So they want to fix and they want to solve and they want to try and make us feel better. So when they try to make us feel better, unfortunately, what tends to happen is they tend to minimize how we're feeling, because let's make it smaller. Because then if we make that feeling a little smaller, maybe you'll feel better about it. So you'll hear people say things like, for example, oh, well, at least they didn't suffer. Oh, okay. So maybe practically that's true, but emotionally that's not a supportive thing to say. Or they'll go, well, at least they're in a better place. Okay, but the better place is actually here with us, not wherever they've gone, And maybe you don't, maybe you're atheist, maybe you don't have faith, and maybe you don't believe there's a better place to be than right here. So that's unhelpful. So people have to be I think concentrate on people's intent when they say things rather than the content of what they say.
So I 100% agree with that. And I think one of the biggest bugbears, I suppose, of mine is when you're navigating something really difficult and people just drop off the end of the earth. And because they don't know what to say, and then they're worried about saying the wrong thing,
so they just say
they say nothing.
Yeah.
And that makes you, when you're already feeling probably quite alone, you're already struggling emotionally, mentally, and maybe practically as well. Yeah. And they just disappear.
People always say you find out who your friends are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point there, focusing on the intent, obviously maybe try and be conscious of what you're saying.
Yes.
But for this person that's grieving, if somebody's offering support, focus on the intent. Are they actually just trying to help? Maybe they don't get it right all the time, but we're human.
But we're also socialized.
Yeah.
So we have grown up hearing these things. So, our parents have said them, our grandparents have said them. It's kind of culturally what's acceptable. If we look at other cultures, they deal with grief in a very different way than we do. And, you talked about us stoical Brits with the stiff upper lip and, you have to, if you're going to cry, go do it somewhere else because we don't want to upset anybody, And that's why when those people disappear and go, fall out of, the echo chamber and we just don't hear them anymore, it's often because they don't know what to say. And because they don't want to upset you. And so they say nothing. And then you say nothing because you think, oh, well, clearly they don't want to know about this, or I should be over it by now. And so the griever begins to believe that they are somehow defective because they're not over it yet. They haven't moved on. And so what happens is we don't talk about it anymore. So if there are people that can, if there's any way that someone could support someone who's going through grief and loss, it would be to just listen. To quote Stephen Covey, to listen with the intent of hearing, to understand, not to listen to speak. So not to listen to have a reply, but just to listen so that you can go to be there. Not to fix, not to resolve, but just to hear.
It's another skill we could also develop outside of the sphere. So, but you mentioned there about moving on. is there such a thing?
Okay, so my preferred terminology is moving forward.
Okay.
Because we move forward with that person in our lives. They're never gone. They will always have been in our lives. They are a part of our history, and they're a part of who we are. So for me, we move forward, but we move forward in an emotionally complete way rather than in a painfully, in an emotionally painful way.
Yeah.
And that, so yes, can we move forward? Absolutely, 100%. We can, without disrespecting that loved one, without, forgetting their existence. We can definitely move forward in a healthy way.
Do any of your clients ever come to you with the idea that, well, if I move forward, if I'm no longer sad, there's like a sense of guilt about how can I be happy when then they're not here? If we're talking about grief around death, they're no longer here. They've gone through all of that, and now I'm happy.
I know. It's really hard to overcome that feeling that your life can go on and you can be fulfilled and happy in your life. Part of the process that we work with in edutherapy is allowing you to acknowledge that you can move forward. You're not disrespecting that individual. You're not, it's not like they've disappeared. They are still part of your makeup. They're still in your photographic album in your head, and they will be. And even with a traumatic experience with maybe someone you don't want to remember, that changes you. It changes you as a person, and you can't undo that.
Thank you to our sponsors, Hugh James Solicitors, for supporting this second series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, sudden brain hemorrhage can turn your world upside down, but discovering it was caused by a medical mistake makes it even more devastating. While nothing can change what's happened, Hugh James's medical negligence team is here to support those who suffered brain injury or bereavement due to medical errors. And their support doesn't end there. The Hugh James Wills and Estate team is also on hand to help you plan for the future with clarity and care, because when the worst happens, the last thing you need is added complexity. To find out more about how they can support you and your loved ones, head to the services page on our website and book a free call with them to discuss your concerns. You can find the link to all of that in our show notes.
So
I also think, having lost really close people to me, I think that there is a sense of honouring them. They didn't get the opportunity to go on and live the rest of their life. And for, we talked about unfairness before the podcast started. I want to touch on that in a second as well. But they didn't get that opportunity. No. And so is it then fair to them for me to waste time, And I think there's a balance then of going, okay, I'm grieving them and going through that process, but then I'm really going to honour them with how I live my life and be happy and move forward as well.
It's really interesting. I lost my sister last year, end of February. And I think I talk about my sister more now than I did when she was alive. And I think that is one way we can honour those people around us, is to continue to say their name and to speak of them and to mention them. And, I can't imagine and I guess I'm kind of lucky in the family that I'm in, I can't imagine not talking about those people fondly and not remembering them and them still being a part of our lives, even though they're not physically with us anymore.
And also talking about them in a way that you kind of would when they're here.
Yes, exactly.
So I would say things about my sister about, she was loud and she was this, and
me too.
Whereas because that's the reality. You're not sugarcoating it. You're not seeing it through like rose tinted glasses.
Yeah.
And I think that's just as important to kind of to respect them rather than be like they were this saint.
A lot. I have had people come to me clients who've come to me who feel incredibly guilty. Maybe talking about a relationship they've had with their mother who's died, and they want to speak the truth, but they feel guilty. And one of the things that I will always say to my clients is, you can say whatever you need to say, because I'm coming from a point of absolutely no judgment at all, which is why we often can't talk to family, because maybe you couldn't say some of the things that you wanted to say. So that's why therapy and support groups and
neutral ground,
it can be really, really helpful, because you can say the truth. But I think talking about them in all of the ways, because don't speak ill of the dead. they were human,
Yeah.
you know, and I know my sister, she fed me mud when I was a kid. And, you know, and I'll still talk about that because it's kind of funny and it's the truth, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, was she heroic when she died of cancer? Absolutely. But that's not her defining, you know, that's not the only thing that made her who she was, you know.
And she made her more of her, right? All of that made her more of her.
Oh, for
otherwise.
real. Yeah, absolutely.
So, but I think there's something really beautiful about kind of, you know, moving forward with all of that and moving forward in a way that is positive.
Yeah.
And I suppose finding purpose in moving forward, and how can we speak their truth? How can we honor them? You know, maybe we're fighting for them. You know, the trust is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
You know, Natalie died at 26, out of the blue. She was fine. I was 20 at the time. You know, I was very much then on the cusp of, you know, being a teenager and turning into an adult. And it really shifted my life and shifted that change quite quickly.
Yeah.
But out of that was born NKMT. And, you know, out of that, so much has changed. And, you know, the research at the university as a result of that. And hopefully there's a lot more to come and we can support more people. And I think for myself, for my family, that's given us a huge sense of purpose and focus as well. But what could that look like for someone to kind of find purpose after grief? I know that you spoke before about sometimes that maybe can maybe delay, you know, the grieving process if it's done too soon. And it can, you know, it's a really great thing for people to put a focus on, like you're saying about the funeral, organizing the funeral. That's, you focus on that, but then that delays the grieving. And I suppose what I want to kind of understand is, how can you find purpose whilst also grieving as well?
I think a couple of things. The first is find your purpose slowly, I would say, is don't rush. The other thing I would say is that trusts and charities are wonderful and have incredible and do amazing work. There's a lot of them, though. There are a great number. And I'm sure you know that the charitable donations are a limited pool of money. So I think if you are looking to find purpose, see what's there already and see how you can be in support of something that's already established and working towards research, already has those relationships. So how can you work with somebody who's already doing something rather than creating another one and starting all over again? You know, there's an amazing African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so actually I think finding purpose could, for me, it's slow down, look after yourself, remember to breathe, eat and sleep, you know, put your oxygen mask on, and then look for purpose slowly. Find the thing that you think really is going to make a difference and see if there's anything out there that is already working kind of in the same direction. And then make an approach and go, hey, how could I help? And put your effort into something where there's already momentum. I
think it's really, to your point, it's really good to have that focus, but it's also so important for you to be in a really good place to apply yourself to that purpose. We get lots of different emails or messages or whatever from a lot of different people, different stories. And there are sometimes people that email saying, you know, my relative or whoever it is died last week, a month ago, you know, a couple of months ago, not like really short period of time. And it's a bit, we kind of do say like, you know, thank you so much for reaching out. And obviously, you know, great that you want to support. Take your time. You know, there's no rush with this. Come back when you're ready. And I think even with the trust, you know, NKMT was set up in 2012 by my brother and my mum mainly. I didn't really get involved until about 2019. I just, it doesn't feel right to me, you know, as in like, it was great and I would help where I could, but to fully put my all efforts in, I just wasn't there personally. I struggled with a lot of what you're saying. I struggled to talk about Natalie. You know, I was starting a new job and I wouldn't really tell people because I don't know, maybe I thought they'd judge me or what, and I was going through a lot of my own journey around that. And so I think it's just so important to take your time. It's not going to be different if you do it now or you do it in a year's time. But what will be different is you
feel. Yeah, absolutely. And to come to part of your original question, I think that sometimes people can get wrapped up in the cause, and we talked about unfairness, and so often the level of grief and the level of motivation to take action is often associated with the perceived unfairness of the thing that has happened. So if there's something that has happened that could be changed through legislation or through better awareness or through something, we can feel motivated to, I have to stop this from happening to other people.
Yeah.
And there's some real kindness in there, that we don't want anybody else to experience the same pain that we've experienced. The risk is that you dive into that so quickly and become so intellectually busy with all of those workings that you don't deal with how you are feeling emotionally. You just keep busy because we're keeping our brain distracted.
Yeah.
So there's that risk if you go too quickly. And so that's why my go slow, eat, breathe, sleep, tend to your own emotions, and then look for where you can apply your purpose. Because I think if you are emotionally healed, you can be so much more powerful in your purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with that more. I actually think that point around unfairness is so accurate. You know, that the unfairness compounds the grief. Someone dies young, it's really unfair. The grief is really heavy. If they died when they were 96, what a wonderful life. Everyone celebrates them. It's not as unfair.
No.
The grief is probably not as compounded because that's the natural order of life.
And it's so amazing as humans how we place this unfairness. Oh, they died on Christmas. Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
If they died on the 20th of December, they wouldn't say the same thing.
Yeah, but we have right before Christmas. And so we place all of this value on the when and the circumstance. And that creates this, oh, that's so unfair.
Yeah.
You know, if someone has children, that creates more unfairness. If they're young children, that creates even more unfairness. You know, so
it's a really, really interesting point. Obviously we're going to be releasing this during Grief Awareness Week, which I think is so important that week is there, because any day like that, it triggers conversations. We just had mental health today. It triggers conversations. People speak up. And obviously, I don't believe that we should be isolating these conversations to a day or a week.
Yeah.
But it's something.
It is.
And I think when we can have these conversations more and we can talk about this, I think it's so incredibly important. What do you hope that people understand more of through these conversations so that they feel less alone in the topic of grief?
First of all, that it's absolutely natural and okay to feel every single thing that you feel. Every feeling that you are having is perfectly valid. I think that's the first thing. And not that you should feel a certain way or you should be at a certain part of your grieving journey, because everyone is unique, as we already said. So I think having Grief Awareness Week is a good thing. But it's like Valentine's Day. It shouldn't be just one day of the year. Like we should get flowers every day of the year. So I think what I hope it does is that it just lets people know that it's okay. And that grief and loss takes so many forms. And it's okay to feel upset about something you've never even had, you know, because people will grieve things that they've never had. You know, you've never had children. Yeah. And then you get to a point where you can't, and you may grieve that completely because but you've never had it. Yeah. You know, and that can account for all sorts of things as well. Again, that loss of hopes, dreams and expectations that we were talking about. So
yeah, I also think it's like, you know, don't invalidate people's experiences.
Not at all.
You know, if they're feeling a certain way, they're you know, it's very valid for them to feel like that. And actually then to yourself being like, I feel like this, so I'm not going to allow my feelings to be invalidated by the expectation that I should be over it, or this isn't as bad as that person's circumstances. It's how you feel, and I think that's really important.
It is. And I think the other thing is that there's no time on it. You know, everyone's journey is their own unique journey, and you need to take as long as you need to take. And if after 2 years you're still crying every day, okay, that is okay. I'd say find someone that you can talk to, and see if you can do something to heal yourself, because maybe you don't want to cry every day. But to come back to one of your original questions, people are afraid that if they move forward, they lose that person. So some people feel like, actually, if I cry every day, it means I'm remembering them and I love them. And you know what? There are other ways to remember your love for someone. You don't have to cry every day. Yeah. So I think that's hopefully what these kinds of weeks, you know, can do, is let people know that it's absolutely okay. It's perfectly valid. You can move forward. It's not disrespectful. You need to honor yourself. as well at the end of the day.
Yeah, and live your life too.
Mm-hmm.
So, Helen, thank you so much.
You're
that was
welcome.
so helpful, and I'm sure it would be helpful to so many other people. So obviously we'll link your website in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oof. I mean, there was a lot in that, and I really hope you found that episode helpful. This conversation feels especially important this week during National Grief Awareness Week, a time to recognise just how many people are living silently in so much pain, and to remind each other that grief is not something to fix, but something to honour, carry and grow through. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, and thank you so much to our fabulous guest, Helen Arthur. As with all our episodes in this series, we've recorded an exclusive follow-up question with Helen that you won't want to miss. Today, we asked her, what is one singular piece of advice you would give to someone who is supporting a loved one through grief? Head over to our Instagram page and join our Change Collective broadcast channel to watch her answer now. Now, we will be taking a break for a few weeks over the Christmas holidays, but we'll be back in early January, where we'll be turning our attention to the critical issue of the rising cases of high blood pressure in children and the long-term health risks this poses, and most importantly, what we can do about it. Until then, thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and those around you. And thank you, as always, for being part of the Natalie Kate Moss Trust community.